Hi, my name is Pete. I'm the pastor here at Crosswalk Community Church in Napa, California. I just saw a post yesterday on Facebook that told a troubling tale, a very painful tale of a lesbian woman who was going to be baptized in her church that she'd been attending for some time. Baptism is a pretty big step in the faith. It's usually a rite of passage into membership and other things. And just, I don't know all the circumstances, but this is the way the story ended, is before she was going to be potentially baptized, the pastor asked her to renounce her lesbianism and also to renounce her marriage to her wife. Otherwise, she couldn't be baptized. Well, long story short, she didn't get baptized. And so that causes a lot of people to wonder, what the heck? We were at this church and we had no idea. And the bigger question is, how do we know, where we're welcome and where we're not? So I wanted to give you a little clue in. Hopefully this will be helpful and not in any way judgmental. But I want to give you a clue about how do you know before you get deep involved if a church is going to be open or not, and where does that go? And it really comes down to three primary issues that motivate this whole thing about inclusion or not with the LGBTQ community. So let me just run by these things real quick. First has to do with the way of understanding the inspiration and interpretation of the Bible. When you go onto a church's website, you're going to want to look for their belief statement. And if you see words like plenary inspiration, inerrancy, and infallibility, that tells you that you are looking at a church that comes from a fundamentalist or evangelical position. Now, that's going to be problematic for inclusion because generally, if they believe in plenary inspiration, which means God basically wrote the Bible, and if they believe in inerrancy, which means the Bible is absolutely correct, and if they believe in infallibility, which means it absolutely has to be true, all because God wrote it, that's the way they look at it anyway. That means that when you look at issues like homosexuality, there are only like 7 verses in the entire Bible that even talk about it. But none of them talk about it in a positive way. And some of the verses, if you take them out of context anyway, are pretty damning, honestly. So that's where they're getting that from. And they're not going to bend on that because that's the way they approach the Bible. Now, personally, and here at Crosswalk, we don't look at it that way. And there's a whole different way of thinking about how the Bible came to be and how to interpret the Bible that I think more reflects Jesus's era and Paul's era, which was rooted in a rich Jewish rabbinical tradition from whence they came, that allows for all kinds of room. And that's our approach here at this church. But anyway, almost every evangelical church, almost every conservative church is going to believe in that stuff, plenary inspiration, infallibility, inerrancy, and that means the likelihood of being an inclusive church is slim to none. You'll find some mainline churches that aren't, but that's where they're coming from, and it's going to be a tough thing to bend. I'll talk more about that in just a second. Second thing has to do with denominations and the tribe that a church comes from. Like I just mentioned, pretty much any evangelical church in the United States is not going to be inclusive. So that means your Baptist churches, that means your Assembly of God churches, that means your independent churches. Most of those are evangelical because they're independent because they don't want to be tied to a denomination. About half of or more of the Presbyterian churches, most Lutheran churches, most mainline or most denominations are not open. There are some exceptions. Episcopalians, they seem to be open in pretty bold ways. The United Church of Christ, which is not the same as Church of Christ, but the United Church of Christ, they've been open and bold in that way for a long time. The Catholic Church, as a matter of dogma, does not affirm it. American Baptist churches, that's the tribe of Crosswalk that started us. It's a mainline tradition, so it's not an evangelical tradition. So that means that we have authority on our local campus to decide how we're going to be and who we're going to be, and that's why we are who we are as an inclusive community and are getting away with it, even within a denomination that is not. And so long as we're welcome around the table, we'll be at the table because it gives us an opportunity to speak into the situation, hopefully in very positive, redemptive, and inclusive ways. So that's where that is. And I got to tell you, pastors who are in those traditions that are locked in to this particular perspective. We've seen this in the news. United Methodist Church, which is a very progressive mainline denomination, still as a whole voted not to be inclusive. So it's causing all kinds of turmoil there. Well, if you're a United Methodist pastor, or if you're a pastor of a church in a more conservative evangelical tradition, your hands are tied in big ways. And it means you lose your job. If you do this, it means the church could be disbanded in some cases. I mean, it is a mess. But I just want you to know that going into it. Most evangelical churches, and unfortunately, evangelicalism led to the attractional model of churches. Attractional model churches are those that have amazing, high quality production value in their worship experiences. They've got a kick butt band. They've got great lighting. Their staging is phenomenal. Their multimedia is incredible. Almost all the time, those are going to be evangelical churches because the evangelicalism behind that motivated the attractional model in the first place. So that sucks because, boy, they have great productions, man. I mean, the bands are usually hot and music is good. And the Spirit flows in places like that for sure. And yet at the same time, you have this conservatism, which clearly says that LGBTQ are not really going to be affirmed. And most of those churches also, heads up, they are not for gender equality. So wake up on that, man, because the scriptures, if you take that kind of an approach to the Bible, there are scriptures that are going to say clearly women shouldn't be leading men at all, and they're not going to be identified in any kind of serious leadership position. So be aware of that. That's what you're talking about when you have that orientation to the Bible and tradition. So the last final thing that I think motivates this non-inclusivity within the church at large is just good old-fashioned homophobia. There is a fear of the unknown, and unfortunately, people who are in that tradition usually separate themselves from people who are quote-unquote other. And so since they are separated from people who are not like them, they are much less likely to have meaningful conversations where they can gain understanding and grow in their appreciation of what's really going on here. So that's not the case all the way across the board. I'm not saying that every pastor and every Christian who goes to those churches are homophobic. That's not what I'm saying. In fact, I have some dear friends who are pastors of clearly evangelical churches. They're not going to bend on this position. They're going to see homosexuality as a whole as sin and needs to be confessed, etc. And yet at the same time, they are deeply loving people, and I am sure they would do absolutely everything to make sure that they were not being discriminatory toward LGBTQ, even though their policy, I know this is weird, even though their policies are going to dictate that they have limits on that. The other thing I'm going to say to you is to, one, I want to say how sorry I am to the LGBT community on behalf of the church, because I cannot imagine, I've just tasted a little bit, but I cannot imagine how deeply painful this has to be. You're wanting to connect with God, you find a community that seems like it should be all about love and grace and welcoming, and then it doesn't work out. That is so painful, and I'm so sorry if that's been your experience. On the other hand, though, I want to give you hope because we live in an unprecedented era where this conversation can happen out loud, out in the daylight, and that's a wonderful thing. And there are churches that are growing into a different understanding, and CrossWalk is one of those. So be hopeful in that regard. And I encourage you not to fall into the binary trap. That's what our culture is all based on right now, is who's in, who's out, who's right, who's wrong. And it's much more complex than that. Me personally, I used to be in a different place than I am right now. CrossWalk is welcoming and affirming. I've made that abundantly clear with my teaching and positions, which got me fired from a denominational position. So I understand. I'll taste the pain. But you need to understand, I've not always been in this place. There was a time when I had a different view of Scripture and how to interpret it, which was more along the evangelical lines. And it's to my chagrin, I'm embarrassed that that's where I was, but we are all in process. And we're all not there yet. We're not at the same place. And some pastors, some churches are never going to be. This kind of inequality and inequity is going to be with us forever. That's the human condition. It sucks. We want to gain on that, but it just is what it is. So my advice to you as you're thinking about a church is, first of all, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Don't assume that because a few traditions, well, honestly, most traditions are not open and affirming. They're not inclusive. Just remember there are some that are. And in Napa, you've got a handful that are. And we have different flavors and styles in the way we do our services and our ministry that I think somebody can find a home in one of those. Crosswalk is super duper casual. So if you like that high church liturgy kind of a thing that, has this elegant formality to it, which is great. Well, that's not Crosswalk. Go to St. Mary's because that's more their line, or go to one of the Lutheran churches in town that I know is open and affirming, or go to Covenant Presbyterian because I know that they're going to have a more of a formal kind of experience. But if you want to drink your coffee and eat your donut around tables while you're doing worship, listen to a live band, give Crosswalk a try. Maybe you'll like us. So that's all just to give you hope. I know it sucks. We're a long way from equality and equity and inclusiveness across the board. But don't lose all your hope, because there are churches that want to do things in a different way. And that's where Crosswalk is. Check out our website. Check out my teaching on Jesus and homosexuality, because I give you the background and I give you the scholarship behind those 7 texts. I think that scholarship is largely ignored. So check that out, see what you think. I chose to shoot this at our preschool here at Crosswalk because, man, we should know better. I mean, this kind of stuff about treating each other well, this should be so obvious. We learn this from the youngest age possible. But unfortunately, we also learn other things. You have to be taught prejudice. You have to be taught how to be discriminatory and unequal. So that sucks. But we're doing our part, man. So anyway, we're behind you, LGBTQ community and people of color. We're behind you. We're behind you, everybody who has felt estranged and oppressed. We're with you, behind you, because we believe that's where Jesus is all the time. And we're trying to walk with him. So anyway, have a great day. Hope this was helpful in some regard. And I've also published this on our teaching stuff on the church website. If you want to read the blog on this, you're welcome to do that. And we hope to see you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.